Museum Digit
2020.
A Magyar Nemzeti Múzeum online
virtuális konferenciája.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna Chiara Cimoli. I am a museologist, I'm a practitioner and an educator. I live and work in Milano, Italy, and before we start, I would like to thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited in being part of this amazing program. So thank you very much for inviting me, and let's hope that despite the distance and the difficult times we're all experiencing, we can still build knowledge together. And of course, I'm available for any questions, for any comments and whatever. And you can find my email on the PowerPoint. So let's get started. Thank you. So I called my presentation the D word, where D stands for diversity. And here I quote the title of an article written by Portia Moore on her blog, The Inclusium, and you find the reference at the end of the PowerPoint file. Why is the D word slippery? Why is it dangerous? Because more and more the question that has been raised, as you all know, by post-colonial intersectional movements and philosophies and ways of activism is that in the end, who is different from whom? Who sets the paradigm? Who calls somebody diverse and why? I started working in the field of museums about 20 years ago. And at the same time, I started working with migrant audiences. So many of my first projects were really aimed at involving migrant audiences. At that time in Italy, it sounded pretty timely and pretty innovative, so to say, and pretty new and pretty something to do, useful. Also in the cultural field. In the last, say, 5 to 10 years, more and more I felt that it was completely wrong to talk about diversity and to stress the diversity, because actually it is something that is really embedded within our communities, human communities. And so it is important maybe to shift the paradigm from diversity to citizenship. With the cooperative company I work for, it is called Abicittà, we try to reflect upon this intersectional attitude. We are a non-profit association. It's a group of about 20 people coming from the fields of education, architecture, urbanism, museum studies, anthropology, and we share one common methodology, which is participatory design. So every project we develop is actually developed through this very important lens, which is participation. We say it, of course, without any rhetoric or without considering it as the solution, which of course is not. But it is the way we develop our projects. So listening to us is really an everyday methodology. We wouldn't be able to work without listening first. In any kind of context we work for, be it a museum, be it a neighborhood, be it a school, be it a hospital or whatever. Let's start by this kind of mood board I would like to present to you in a very spontaneous way. Books I read recently and images that often come to my mind. Museums and Social Change is a very, very interesting book born out of practices throughout the world. And the sentence you find here comes from that book. I don't want to be included. Instead, I want to question who set the standard in the first place. It is quoted in the first chapter of the book where you find a lot of interesting examples. And I think that is very much the point. We really have to come to terms with this idea of a hierarchy where there is somebody who includes somebody else. So it is very much about the center and the periphery. It is very much about the idea of what a margin is. And the bell hooks comes to mind again and again when talking about margins and who decides who has to stay at the margin. The Politics of Listening is another important book. The word politics is important here because we really consider listening as an active gesture, as a gesture of radical activism. Of course, only if it is shared within a group, within a community, and it can transform, it can translate into real action. The way we do it in Abicità is through designing actions, but there are, of course, many other ways. Black Lives Matter, together with the campaign Museums Are Not Neutral, which was launched a few years ago by the Portland Art Museum, is of course the framework where I think most of our reflections should be set today. We cannot talk about museums, we cannot talk about cultural institutions or institutions as it is, without, of course, having in mind what Black Lives Matter is saying and how they are really transforming the cultural landscape, even through their protests, their sit-ins, their die-ins, all the forms of protest they are enacting in and around museums. See me, hear me, don't define me, as you read on this pink flag that was shown during a manifestation organized by the Glasgow Women's Library in Glasgow. And again, it is very much about listening and not defining. So really somehow reframing our everyday's attitude. Here is an example of one of the many workshops developed by the Glasgow Women's Library, which was born as a library, but has a very important museum section. And so it is actually a two-faced institution. So you see a round table, like a cake with different slices, and people sitting around sharing tea and coffee and cheese and crackers, I imagine, and having an open discussion. This discussion is being facilitated by somebody, this young lady at the bottom, because of course listening, if it has to become action, needs to be mediated, needs to be facilitated through a technology, through a method, through lenses, through a toolbox. So it is a job, it is a real job, and that is what we try to do in our everyday practice. Let's Talk Listening was the title of an event that took place last year in Imagine IC Amsterdam. Imagine IC is a cultural institution. It is also a museum in the southeastern part of Amsterdam, a very diverse, sorry, I cannot find any synonym in English, neighborhood. And the institution is very much asking itself how to co-curate exhibitions, events together with the community living and working in the neighborhood. It's interesting. Let's talk listening. And the workshops during those days were very much built around this idea of listening as something we have to learn to do. It is not so much common. We know how to do it technically, but we don't know how to translate it into an action. And you can read more on the museum's website. Another example of listening comes from Museum Rotterdam, which is the city museum. A few years ago, the museum realized that a building site was taking shape just outside the window, just in front of the museum. And it was a building site where mainly Bulgarian workers worked all day. So what the museum did was they decided to build an ephemeral canteen that would last for the time the building site would last. And the idea was to have lunch with those workers, with those citizens, in order to get to know their story, their perceptions, their expectations, their hopes, the place they occupy within the city of Rotterdam. They hired a Bulgarian cook to make sure that everybody would like the food, which is of course important. And so they decided to invest time in this project that was very much about listening, because if you're a city museum and you really want to tell the story of the city as it goes by, as it evolves through times, you really have to be there. You have to be within the city, in the city fabric on a daily basis. This is a very crucial and delicate example from Italy, where post-colonial studies and a reflection about the colonial past has started only in the last 5 to 10 years, apart from a few books and maybe academic research. More and more it is becoming crucial. It is becoming something we really have to deal with. We have to open up discussions. We have to open up roundtables. We have to invite people. And this museum in Rome, which used to be called the Colonial Museum, actually changed its name into the Italian African Ilaria Alpi Museum, dedicated to a young Italian journalist who died in Somalia. And it is working on through a participatory methodology, mostly with the second and third generation youth, but not only. So it is really trying to reinterpret its collections through a multifaceted view, and really adding up different layers, different voices, different perceptions, and trying to find a way to put it in the present and in the future. Here is Musei e Migranti, gli strumenti per l'incontro, Museums and Migrants, the tools for the encounter. It was a series of workshops that took place from 18 to 19, so 1 to 2 years ago, at the Egyptian Museum in Turin, which, as you know, is a very brave and very courageous museum, who really chose many years ago to somehow ask itself the very crucial questions around what it means to be an Egyptian museum in Italy. Whom is it talking to? Only the tourists or the Egyptian communities living in the city, in Italy, and so on? And really trying to open up discussions. The way we decided as Abicittà to develop these workshops in collaboration with the museum was to somehow provide an immersive situation, which you see here in this very eloquent picture, like being in the middle of the museum rooms, no matter if visitors would pass by, because that's how the museum rethinks itself. And listening with the help of facilitators, listening to the different opinions, voices, requests from stakeholders, from migrants associations, from people who, for many, many different reasons, work within the social tissue of the city. A manifesto and the proceedings of these workshops will be published on the museum's website. I'm sorry, unfortunately, only in Italian. And another example I'm going to quote very briefly, but because I consider it a very, very clever and very generous way of working within society was set by GAMEC, the Contemporary Art Museum in Bergamo, northern Italy. This is the city where the pandemic spread. Or not only spread, but mostly it's one of the cities that was most harshly hidden by the pandemic. Very, very violently and very abruptly, and it was a real tragedy for many, many families. Non recidere forbice quel volto is the title of a series of workshops facilitated by the museum in collaboration with other mediators to open up a discussion about grief, about illness, death, about family, about community, about really transforming trauma into something shareable, into words, so that it could be shared. So the idea was to provide something like a safe space where perceptions, emotions, and even personal stories could be told, and they could somehow become part of the museum itself. So let's jump to the second part of my presentation. So here are a few images from our everyday life, our workshops, and the way we work with different audiences. I would like to share a few case studies. The first is Museums and Stereotypes, which is a school, actually. It is a training course for museum operators. We have been designing it in the last 3 years. It's an international school for museum operators, and within this framework, we want to reflect upon all the stereotypes and the forms of hidden biases and prejudice that are embedded in museum practice. Within this more general background, we decided to design a tool that could be useful for museum operators. And I would like to share it with you because you can find it, you can download it for free from the Museums and Stereotypes website. You can find the link at the end of the presentation. And you might want to use it with your colleagues or partners or students, maybe if you teach. So it is very much about somehow shaking our certitudes and shaking our attitudes, our visual attitudes, and also the word choice through maybe a very simple series of activities, very open activities we suggest. So you can find, of course, a kind of a vademecum. And you see, these are the core tools within the toolbox, images from the 50s and 60s, and you will be able to use them and to discuss them and to share what comes to mind first and how you can apply some sort of new ideas and new perceptions to your museum. Before we launched it and before we published it on our website, we tested it with a few colleagues who volunteered just to test it and to provide feedback so that we knew what was working more, what was working less, and we were able to really change it and transform it, which we continue doing through time. And it is also about listening, because maybe you have the best idea in the world, but until you test it, you don't know if it's very good or not. Unlearning Stereotype is a platform we created within the Bosch Alumni Network to collect other practices from the field, so to listen again to other practices around prejudice and stereotype, not only from the museum field, but also from libraries, school, LGBTQs associations, and so on, in order to really somehow try to cross the viewpoints and to make them react to one another. There is an open call that will unfortunately be closed by the time this program takes place, because it closes November 1st. So by the time you listen to me, it will be closed. But you might want to follow, because there will be more events coming. And the last project I wanted to talk to you about is the one we are concentrating all our energies on in this very moment. It's called BIG, Borgo Intergenerazionale, and it is a co-housing project in the northeast periphery of Milan. As you can see on the map, the BIG project is just behind the train lines, so it is somehow cut from the rest of the city by the train line. And that is the perception of that neighborhood called Greco, which feels itself as secluded, separated, somehow isolated from the city. It is a very ancient and very interesting, lively neighborhood. And we were able a few years ago to become the managers of this very interesting project, where 25 small apartments will be inhabited by fragile families or people, meaning elderly, meaning single parents with children, and also students, with the idea that they can share experiences, they can share their spare time, they can somehow volunteer for each other's, and create this sort of utopian small city within the city. Utopian, but very, very real. Our headquarters, so to say, our offices will move there. Actually, they just moved there to make sure we are physically there, so we can follow the project, we can facilitate everyday's life, we can be there, we can accompany it. Just show you a couple of images and to give you a hint of how the neighborhood is. You see all this very strong, very impacting image of the train line cutting the neighborhood from the rest of the city. And part of the project is to use these arcades to develop sports programs and social programs, and to transform them into a public art open air museum, to say. This is top left, the place as it used to be, as it is becoming. And on the right, you see one of the first apartments which was finished. It was last week, so it is fresh and white, as you see. It's very full of light, pretty small, but you have everything you need in it. So it's going to be quite a cozy and comfortable place to live. We decided that it would be the right moment and the right place to design a museum there. And this is what makes our heart beat professionally, and not only in this very moment. So we are very excited to create actually our first museum. And as risky, as slippery as it can be, it is also a great, great adventure. We asked two partners to work with us. The first one is a radio station, a free independent radio station that was born about 2 years ago near Big. And the second one, you see it here, it's Pinacoteca di Brera, the very important national museum where many, many masterpieces are preserved. And so we were, kind of, we really wanted to work with them. We have already worked with the Pinacoteca di Brera as consultants. We have facilitated workshops and designed many activities. And so we wanted somehow to maybe take a further step. So to ask the Pinacoteca if they were interested in working in the outskirts, in the periphery of the city, towards the margins, so to say, if you look at the plan of Milano. And they accepted enthusiastically, which speaks a lot, of course, of their attitude, their open-minded attitude. So the idea is that we are going to design programs together, and we are going to be like a little Brera in the outskirts. Of course, we are not going to show any precious works of art, because that's not the aim and that's not the right place to do so, and it wouldn't make sense if it was not within a broader project. But the idea is to design a scattered museum, a very flexible museum, like pop-up museum, moving from private homes to public spaces, the Greco Square, the big and beautiful garden we have around the building. And we also have one of the apartments which will be available for residencies, for curators and artists who will provide thought and works of art and energy for the museum. So we are at the very beginning. We are launching a program of workshops where we will listen to the neighborhood, meaning the elderly, young people, students, bypassers, stakeholders, and so on. So we really want to start from what the people know, what the people need, and what it means to be a museum in that precise neighborhood. The second action will be, which will stem out of those workshops, will be to build loan boxes to travel around the neighborhood, so as to share all this knowledge again and again, and to maybe create new networks. So I hope I will be able to tell you more in the future. So if you have any questions or curiosities or whatever, feel free to write to me. And I end with this very subjective and short list of resources you find both online and offline. And I would like to thank you very, very much for listening to me. Goodbye. Thank you.